If I could save time in a bottle, the first thing that I'd like to do is to save every day till eternity passes away, just to spend them with you. If I could make days last forever, if words could make wishes come true, I'd save every day like a treasure, and then again I would spend them with you.
I always, in writing, identify myself with my middle initial, Peter, because there was a time when there were several George Muellers in Appleton and Menasha, and I used to get their mail. Especially the bills bothered me. I'm told that I was born on the day my uncle, George Holzschuh, was buried, the 31st of July, 1921. He was killed 3 years before that in France, in the Battle of Chateau Thierry. And in that battle, many U.S. soldiers were killed. My father bought the Sherwood Hotel, which he called the Sherwood House. And he hired my mother, who was 16 then, to be the maitre d' and the chef. There wasn't a wild animal that was edible that she didn't cook, including raccoons, groundhogs, woodchucks, rabbits, squirrels, deer, bear. The one thing she said, her mother told her never to cook. You cook a goose is tough. You put a goose in a big pot and with a stone, and you boil it until you can stick a fork in the stone, and then you eat the stone and throw away the goose. I was born in the apartment above the store. Now the store was built in 1916 when my father sold the hotel that he owned. He was the major shareholder in the bank and founded it, and until he died was president of it. And he had begun selling farm implements while he still had the hotel. So he started the farm implement and hardware business in that store in 1916. I think my father was a remarkably capable, for his day, entrepreneur. I do think I inherited some of that. And you know, by the time I went to school, I was 6. I could read, and I learned how to read by reading the labels, asking people what they said, and identify the letters. We didn't have a kindergarten; we had a primer. which was like the German system. And I was in it about 3 days. I called it sandbox. I wasn't learning anything, so they promoted me to first grade. My education started in Sherwood in a Catholic school in which there were 3 rooms, 3 grades in each room, and about 40 children in each classroom. In the 3rd grade, mind you, the teacher could only teach 1 grade at a time, and that in itself had to be quite a task. I was learning what the 4th and 5th graders were doing, and so I was getting a head start on those as I went along. And then by the time I got into the 5th grade, I could help the teacher teach the 3rd graders and the 4th graders. About the time I was almost 7, it was the 3rd of July in 1928. Lois and I, my little sister who was 2 years and 10 months old, got meningitis, and she died in 8 days, and I didn't. But to keep the fever brought on by meningitis under 107, I was given cold water enemas and covered with wet sheets. Remember, it's the 3rd of July. My mother and a couple of her sisters and another lady from the village were with me around the clock. I didn't eat anything for about 5 weeks, and so my weight dropped from 56 pounds, which was on my report card from school in May, went down to 30 pounds. And about mid-August or so, I ate solid food for the first time. And my mother carried me outdoors to visit with a couple of kids. And about that same time, my father was diagnosed with cancer of the bladder. And so in September, my mother and he went to St. Joseph's Hospital in Milwaukee, where Dr. Sargent operated on him 5 times, and he came home in May of 29. When Dad came home, there was a parade of cars that met him about 2 miles out of the village, and there was a special party on the lawn next to the store that went into the wee hours. In any case, there was still cancer there, and he knew he didn't have long, but he bought a pool table, and we put it in the dining room. This was a pool table full size, but with legs that you could fold under, and we kept that pool table up, and he taught me how to play pool. And he died the 19th of June in 1930. Tough times. When you consider what my mother had to go through, you have to admire the strength of that gal to survive all that. We opened up the store about 7 o'clock in the morning and closed it about 9 o'clock at night, every day except Sunday. There would be very lull times. Nobody's there, and so we'd be working outside or stocking the shelves or checking what we needed to order, or we're just upstairs eating. So we had a bell on the front door. When people came in, the bell rang, and we'd bounce down and take care of it. So at about 12 o'clock, we're all around the table, the bell rings, somebody has to go, wait on somebody. And so we learned how to eat fast. And we had 17 stairs to go down. And I remember by the time I was 12 or so, even going downstairs, I took 2 at a time. And never fell once. I started assembling farm implements, the simplest ones, when I was 9. I waited on people From about the age of 10, I sold my first appliance, a stove, when I was 12, and I sold my first washing machine when I was 13. An interesting thing, I sold it to a man who was operating High Cliff Park then. A washing machine to give his wife on his birthday. Unusual, but I think it took a certain extra sales skill. I learned very much from my uncle Norbert, who was an employee. We called him Snubs. I learned a lot from him, such as his simple statement, you have to satisfy the customer. It was not an easy thing when you've been setting up farm implements and you've got little greasy, dirty hands to have to come in and sell people cookies, which you had to handle by hand, put them in a bag. In those days, nothing was prepackaged. But I cleverly concealed my dirty hands. It was, you know, I enjoyed waiting on people, because in those days, all of our customers were our friends. That's the way the small town businesses were. And it was very pleasant, I think. Farmers often paid their bills, and most of our customers were farmers, often paid their bills after the harvest in the fall. And they just weren't able to do that in 1930. I remember my grandfather saying, there's no point in shipping pigs to Chicago for the stockyards because it cost more to ship the pigs than you were paid for them. But in our case, in this case, we had a couple $100,000 on the books, which mostly was never paid. So we had a real struggle. And my mother lost the business by selling it to my brother in 1934. Late June, we moved to Green Bay, and she set up a little gift shop. And she made baked goods for sale. She baked bread every day and coffee cakes every day. And I had a bicycle, which I delivered with the basket on. We stayed there until October. The 1st of October, we moved to Appleton. And in 1935, my friend and I bought a popcorn stand from George Griesbach. George was a polio victim, and his business was so good, the popcorn stand, that he wanted to sell his old one. My friend Harold Bergman and I bought the popcorn stand for $15 a piece. And I made a deal with the lady who lived next to the Appleton Theater. I agreed with the lady to pay her $5 a month to get power for those things from her porch light. So $5 covered the rental for the space as well as the use of the power. And it was kind of interesting. In those days, the prices changed at 6 o'clock. And the price was for an adult was 25 cents, and for a child was 10 cents. Anyway, the idea was to open at 5:30 so we could get the people going to the 6 o'clock deadline. And Harold agreed to be there with me, but he didn't come till 7:30. So I bought him out the same day, and I ran the popcorn stand all summer. Made $50 a month, which in those days was pretty good. Well, it was dealing with people again. And I always did that with a smile, and it was kind of interesting. In those days, popcorn wasn't sold in theaters. Candy bars were, but not popcorn. I could drive a car at 12. I used to go in the car that we had, which was an old Chrysler at the time. You sit in the Chrysler and steer, and while it was still, and put it through all the gears. And then finally, I started it and backed up a little bit and went forward a little bit. And I can remember on my 12th birthday, we had a Model T steak truck. And we had a party, and I went and picked up all my classmates. they rode in the back of the truck. On the trips to Green Bay, we had 2 spares on our truck. And we almost never got there without one flat. We'd have to change. Between Kaukauna and Green Bay was a narrow strip, one lane wide of concrete. So everybody going both ways traveled on that until you met somebody, then you went off on the side a little bit. Always tooted the horn and waved to the farmers in the field. And we had a cutout on the truck, which meant you could hit this thing and the exhaust went out before the muffler. It made quite a racket. My father gave me a .22 when I was 6. And I became a hunter at that age. And then after my father died, I got his shotgun, which was the 12 gauge old model 1897 Winchester with a hammer. And that's when I started hunting ducks. And the next year, hunting rabbits and pheasants with Snubs, and it was my uncle, of course, and Ivo. We did a lot of hunting together. And the Snubs taught me many things through the years, and how to really hunt was one of those things. When we moved to Appleton from Green Bay, I went to St. Joseph's 8th grade and 9th grade. And after that, started at Appleton High School, which at that time was a 3-year school, sophomore, junior, and seniors. Her name was Mueller before, spelled the same and everything. And we were in the same homeroom. In study halls, we were next to each other. And all the study halls were in the auditorium. We sat in alternate seats. And I always went to school, went to work. And so I used those study halls to really study. And I remember passing notes from Joan to this girl, Janet Knorr, next to her. And then one day, I had to collect money. Then I came finally to look Joan in the face. And I thought, what a pretty girl. And so that was my junior year. And it was near the end of the year. Sometime during the summer, I think in late July, I called her and asked if I could visit with her. And they had just come back a few days before from Spring Green, where her sister Ada had died and was buried, and they went to the funeral. And the family lived years back in Spring Green for a while. And later on we had a date. I think we probably went to a movie. So when we started the year in the new high school, it's now called West, and we got our lockers next to each other. And I remember saying, gee, she walks smooth. What a graceful person. And so we began to have dates. But by the end of the senior year, you sign each other's yearbooks, you know, and there's some very nice messages in there about the relationship between Joan and me. We were sweethearts all through college. We became very close. Our relationship, it seems to me, was always very special. Our love was true love, which doesn't often happen at that age. I enlisted in the Navy in September of '42. I graduated in May of '43, and I became engaged to Joan on my birthday in '43, and was called up to active duty at Northwestern. in Chicago on the 1st of September. And after about 4 or 5 weeks, I was one of about 500 guys who were tested for electronics training at Harvard and MIT. And I scored the highest score that had ever been scored in that test, which I was told was a kind of an IQ test, and it was 165. I was made an officer and a gentleman on the 23rd of December, and Joan came down for the midshipman's ball, the officer's ball, and we were married on the 27th of December. And after that I was ordered to Harvard and MIT, and then to the ship. The transfer to the ship was on, and I mention this because it was on election day, 1944. And we had seen President Roosevelt in Boston just a few days before that, and he looked like the wrath of God. We didn't think he's going to live long. And of course, the election night, he was reelected, and so there he is involved, and still is involved. And then went to sea shortly after the first of the year on the mighty Towner, and this was an attack cargo ship, so we did a lot of practicing to get those landing barges off. It took us 2 hours to get them all off to start with. By the time we were adept at it, we got it down to 20 minutes, and that's a pretty good deal for 24 barges. All 24 of the landing barges had to have an officer. I never could understand that, but that was the case. So we had about 75 officers. It's a lot for a ship that size. I was the senior ensign, which is like being how can you have honor among thieves, you might say. I had some good friends. Maybe my closest friend was the doctor. The doctor was a Jewish fellow. He was a gynecologist, not exactly the kind of skills you need on a ship with all men, but at least he was a doctor. And I maintained a friendship with Joe Gershman. After the war, every time I went to New York, and I did a couple times a year for the paper business, and I would call Joe or tell him ahead of time, I'm going to be in New York, can we get together? And Joe would invite me to his home. I was the radar officer, and so I had those guns. I could direct gunfire at targets with those radars. As an officer, I had to be at my watch all day from 8 to 4. But then in addition, I had watches. So I might have the 4 to 6 watch, that's at night, or the 6 to 8, or the 8 to 12, or the 12 to 4, or the 4 to 8. There was most always an extra 4 hours. On the way to Pearl Harbor, we lost half our power because of what turned out to be stuff put in the main steam line, which had to be sabotage. So we lost a couple of weeks there while that was fixed, and then we went on to the South Pacific. The Japanese captured the Philippines, and our forces on Bataan held out. Eventually, they ran out of food and everything else, and they were gaunt, and there must have been 3,000 or 4,000 men, maybe 10,000. And the Japanese made them walk several hundred miles, and hundreds of guys, I think maybe 3,000 or 4,000, couldn't make it. And if somebody was going to fall down, collapse, if he fell down, the Japanese just left him there and shot him. And if he was stumbling and needed help, and somebody else kind of helped him to walk, they shot both of them. Many times at underway on Sundays, a group of us Catholics, we were the only ones who volunteered to do this. We had a kind of a church service. We'd read some of the Bible, and maybe lead to the group in a song or two. And there maybe were about 40 men involved. So my religious faith meant something to me. And a lot of times on these beaches where we landed, there weren't many people, but there was always a little chapel, maybe as big as this room, pretty well concealed from the air. And if we were fortunate, there was a chaplain around somewhere. After all, these were little bases. And so, yes, my faith meant a lot to me then, and as it does now. We arranged to pick up a Jeep. We had to give away our Jeep, which was a compliment. The Jeep was a compliment on our ship, until the Navy changed that, and they changed it to Noumea. So we got rid of our Jeep. But we found a way to steal one somewhere along the line. We painted it and put a false serial number on everything. And so we were going to Leh, and the captain had a buddy on shore, in charge. And he wanted to put the Jeep in a boat, take the boat to shore, and drive to where this guy was based. So there was a Raymond release, it's called. The picture of a big hook, and on inside of it, there's a loop over here, and inside is a line. So when you bring the hook down, gradually that line comes up and it discharges whatever is on the hook. So we had a guy from the Merchant Marine, a young ensign, and it was his job to be at that hold where we got the Jeep out of. So the Jeep was going over the side, and the boat's down there, and the coxswain and the other men on the boat were on the stern sheet of the boat. Now that's about 8 feet square. And as the Jeep is going down, he doesn't realize this Raymond release is there. The Jeep gets down about 10 feet above the boat, and the Jeep goes off onto the stern sheets of the boat and sinks into 60 fathoms of water. His name was Ensign Bowman, I think. And he was, at our first reunion, was a member of the State of New York Supreme Court. So he's grown up some. We were involved in the reserve fleet with the landing on Okinawa, where we were about 20 miles away, and we saw the first of the kamikazes. They never came at us, fortunately, but we stood in general quarters for 48 hours, and then the reserve fleet was turned away. It didn't need us. And so the war ended shortly thereafter, and I remember getting a message that the atom bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. And I gave this message to the captain. It was a top secret message, about 4 lines long. And I said, "Captain, do you know what this really means?" He said, "No, what does it mean? I never studied atomic theory." So I said, "Well, I did study atomic theory. If this was really an atom bomb, war's going to be over shortly." And then 3 days later, the second one fell on Nagasaki, and I said, "This is it." Now, early in September, we took a division of Marines up to Hokkaido, and they were based in Sapporo. We went into Nagasaki and looked around at the devastation, which was awful. And we went ashore and drove around a little bit in a Jeep. And we didn't realize that we were personally putting ourselves at risk, but we didn't stay there long. But it was a wonderful feeling that the war was over, and we'd soon be back home. And I was sent home, and met Joan on the 15th of February in '46. We met in the LaSalle Hotel in Chicago. We had a few days there and then went home. And as you might expect, not quite 9 months after that, Greg was born. Her letters were filled with words of affection, and I did the same. And I wrote every day, and of course they couldn't be mailed every day either. They were mailed in bunches. And I didn't keep hers because I had no space, but she kept mine. And I found, after she passed away, I found some in the dresser in Tobin's room, and some in the dresser in her room, and the others are downstairs in a box. And some of those were pretty sexy, of mine anyway. I signed up for the summer term for graduate school at Madison, and I saw a notice posted in the Science Hall that Marathon was looking for chemists. And so I called the man, and this was on Thursday. His name was an unlikely name of Joe Fagot, F-A-G-O-T. That was his name. He was in the personnel department. So I got in to see Joe a little after lunch. And he took me over to the research facility, introduced me to Don Davis, who was the director. And he called me at 5:30. He said, "You got the job at $200 a month." On the September 23rd, 1946, I started to work. And my first job was to abstract patents and chem abstracts and all of our laboratory records. So I worked during the holidays, and I started running a 2-inch waxer. One of the things that I got into while I was doing this was examining some of the stuff that companies were sending in to look at. And this is, would you believe, the first time anybody had seen polyethylene and polypropylene. So I laid out, all on my own, wax blends. And within the first 50 wax blends, which took about 2 weeks to run, I submitted information for patent for wax coatings for bread wrapper and frozen food overwrap. Patent was applied for, and we made the first commercial runs in May. Would you believe it? And cellophane was coming in as a big competitor. But this change in wax paper just absolutely booted cellophane out quickly. So that was very successful. And I had a copyright name. I called it Titom. Along about 1948, we were making a package for, some people call it Beatrice, some people call it Beatrice Foods. We had developed a package for them for cottage cheese. And they were having failures in the packaging. And the man who worked in cheese packaging was George Forsey. And George went down and talked to these people, and he came back. And in those days, you know, my table was about this far to the piano from George's. And George was telling Don Davis what he found. And he was saying something like, they use diathermic heat to seal the package after they got the cottage cheese in. And they have some arcing. And I said, "Do you mind if I listen?" George, he talks a little more. I said, "You know, that sounds like dielectric heat." And so they're developing a conductivity because of the fluid in the cheese. Cottage cheese, mind you. And Don phoned those people, and that was correct. And so I said, "Why don't we set up a project on dielectric heat?" And I did a little research and wrote a report and got the approval to do that. And so I developed from that ways of setting our adhesives in the blink of an eye. And we made folding cartons, you know, for things like ice cream. They still make those today. And those would go through a line, the glue would be put on, and they'd be pressed together, you know, in stacks of 50. And that glue had to sit for a half hour. And sometimes they ran out of glue but didn't realize it. They'd have thousands of these cartons which were folded and everything but no glue on them. They had to throw them away. So I developed this thing, and there must be 25 at least carton machines that had those dielectric heating units put on them, and no more failures. And I was always looking to make wax paper glossy, high gloss. I made some blends of wax, and I had a ferrotype plate, which is a very high gloss chromium that you use in photography. You make your pictures and put them down on there, and they'll dry nice and glossy. I found a blend that I could run with a chrome surface and get that same gloss on wax paper. My boss called me in one day and he said, "I want you to quit working on this." I gave him a long story back. I said, "Ross, if you knew half as much about wax paper as I do, you wouldn't be telling me this. This is going to work. Stop it," he said. So I went to the plant manager and I said, "Fitz, this is going to work, but I got to have a chrome-plated roll." He said, "What's it going to cost?" I said, $5,000. Go ahead and get it. I said, you order it and I'll take care of the details." You wouldn't believe the superhuman efforts we had to do this, but we made a whole jumbo roll of wax paper. Beautiful. And I put it in Saturday on Wilcox's desk. He wasn't in. That's why I put it there then. He never said a word to me. Glamacoat, I called it. And that was so successful, we had to equip 4 waxing machines that way. Whole new business. Of course, that's all gone now. You get high and you have your 15 minutes of fame, and then it's gone, you know. But those were my accomplishments at Marathon in R&D. And I was successful enough that I decided once American Can bought the company, there'd be no room for guys that didn't have PhDs in the lab. So I asked to get into manufacturing, and I was made superintendent of the canal plant in '57. In '59, promoted to the Ashland paper mill for manager, and came back in '63 to manage canal, and '64 to manage Neenah plant, and '66 to manager process engineering for all of American Can's forest products lab. And in '68, I went to Wisconsin Tissue. Jim Asmuth and I were friends. It was family owned then. And Jim wanted to hire me, so he showed me the plant one night, and I saw all these black iron pipes dripping water and slow machines. He had a machine that he bought, a Yankee machine, tissue machine that he bought in '63, and I bought some paper from him when I was still in Ashland. And the thing was supposed to run faster, but it was only running at 1,100 feet a minute. And I had changed the Ashland mill to completely secondary fiber. And I did the same at Wisconsin Tissue. From '68 to '72, rebuilt both paper machines, had number 2 up to 4,000 feet a minute, and number 1 from 1,100 feet to 2,500 feet a minute, had built a new de-ink plant, and got all that done. Of course, increasing the output of the paper machines meant a tremendous number of converting machines added. So by that time, we were up to 1,250 people from the 250 that we started with. And I remember the days when the river was facing discharges from municipalities and mills that made the river kind of a mess. And I was the first guy, Wisconsin Tissue, the little company, to come up with a wastewater treatment plant. The first company, which reduced suspended solids 99.8%. The growth of Wisconsin Tissue was probably, well, undoubtedly, a very, very major thing. But all those buildings were either built while I was there or were authorized while I was there. And then I retired. I was made president in 83. I agreed to serve as chairman of the Integrated Paper Services, which was the group that left the Institute of Paper Chemistry. I served on several boards, and in '92 was a co-founder of the Hall of Fame.
The Paper Hall of Fame was born in Neenah, and it started very modestly with the encouragement of the Neenah Historical Society. In August of 1999, Kimberly Clark said they would donate this Atlas Mills structure to the Paper Industry International Hall of Fame. That opened up the door so much that we were all very excited about doing it. We knew we'd have a heck of a job raising the money to do this. But we have such a unique location here. The Fox River is in many ways, particularly a spot like this, as a thing of beauty. You can see it beautifully from the Atlas Mills structure. It is the very turbulent portion of the Fox River, the wildest part of the Fox River, where it kind of reminds me of Old Man River. It just keeps flowing along. Every time I'm here, I'm stimulated just by the view of the river itself and what is happening to this building to enable us to provide teaching and educating and inspiring people on behalf of our industry. There's something to me that's magic about making paper. I have a real passion for this industry, and since I had such a good life based on it, I decided to put back and pay back, in a sense, by working on behalf of the industry through the Paper Industry International Hall of Fame. It's been the focus of my life ever since the very beginning. We have a very active board, dedicated board, with a lot of local help, financially and otherwise, from members of the Appleton, Neenah, Menasha area, and some major paper companies. We're very proud of this building and what has been done in these 5 years.
As I and other members of the board have traveled around this continent and overseas, we have seen at first hand the pride that people have who have lived in communities with paper making and related industries. Somehow, there's a kind of feeling that's very special. The Hall of Fame has its focus on people, not things. And when you shake it all out, an industry, a company, in the minds of many, connotes only facilities, buildings, machines, products, and only incidentally, people. Companies to be successful must have all those things in good measure, and their people must work together willingly, cooperatively, productively, and creatively. But someone must be the initiator, the inventor, the developer, the technologist, the leader, the never give up one. Over time, these rare people are the ones who gave life and who continue to provide the leadership and the vitality to their companies and their communities.
When I was a boy growing up and I saw the Depression and the difficulties, the local paper machines never shut down. You know, they ran half weeks, 3 days maybe, but they always kept running, which meant that the area here didn't suffer as much in the Depression as a lot of other areas did. The paper industry is something very special to me. For 50 years now, still the leading state producer of paper in the country. And we have the greatest concentration of paper mills in the world on the Fox River. Paper industry has been good to me.
To most of us, a house is just a house. But when there's love in it, a house becomes a home.
A key part of my life has been my children and grandchildren, but principally my children. Greg was our first child. Greg was a sweet baby, and he's a wonderful young child. At 4 years of age, he was able to run the record player and the radio, and he had an interest in that. He may well have been influenced by watching me, and I had told him that I was an electronic engineer in the Navy. And when we moved to Ashland in 1959, and he had his own room, he set up a system where he had if you opened the door, a light went on and a bell rang, and he set that system up himself, which showed his interest. And I was a good student, and decided to major in electrical engineering at Marquette. He sang in the choir, and that's where his association there with the rest of the singers brought him in contact with the lady who became his wife. Her name was Karen Wojtek, and they moved to Framingham, Massachusetts, where he went to work for Magnavox was the name of the company. The outfit that devised the Magnavox radio tube, and which also became the major electric source for the microwave oven. Greg has had his ups and downs through the years, but he's always been a wonderful son. Of course, there's something special maybe about one's firstborn. Tim was born in 1950. Both he and Greg were born at St. Elizabeth Hospital in Appleton. And we got there just in time, whereas it took almost 14 hours for Greg to come and be born alive. It took about 20 minutes for Tim. And we had trouble getting him to eat, but we tried everything we could and could only get him to eat about every 2 hours. And then once a day he'd have a burp that would come from his toes and he'd fall asleep. He wanted to be a rock musician. He'd been practicing with a guitar. He'd been playing with a couple local boys, and he's being a product of the I think as a growing up years, he was a product of what we would call the 60s, where lots of young men wore long hair and beards and didn't take baths very often, and he fit that mold pretty well. And I remember he was going to go to where it all starts in the big city, try to go to New York and make it from there. And I told him that I couldn't support that activity. I supported the boys to go to college, but from then on they were on their own. He, whatever stand I took, would oppose, including the 10 Commandments and going to church. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because I told him I didn't support not going to college. Maybe he felt bad about that, but he said nothing at the time. People wanted to be known for some reason. And I always felt if you want to be known, you got to do something. Not just grow hair. You got to do something. You got to stand for something. I hope that he succeeds.
In recent years, Tim has achieved considerable personal satisfaction involving himself on behalf of various charities. He has spent much time and effort in numerous activities to publicly address the problems of people with autism. Such selfless behavior indicates a positive maturing by Tim, which has made for pleasant phone conversations between us. On my recent birthday, he sent me flowers with a message to Daddy with love, which brought a smile to my soul.
I think with Nell, he has met somebody who is with him more compatible, and he has come around some, and is a more positive kid today than he was. And I say kid because he'll always be a kid to me, you know. And I'm hopeful that our relationship might get a little better as time goes on. Tobin is our youngest, and in some ways are most creative. And he just naturally gravitates to music, just as his mother, Joan, did. And that he radiates a certain positivism, optimism. Whenever he goes, he's one of these guys that when he comes into a room, the room lights up. And the night that I developed Guillain-Barré, that I was taken by helicopter from Theda Clark Hospital to Frederick Memorial Hospital in Milwaukee. And Tobin was there every day. And there were times he literally saved my life because he was able to get a nurse when I couldn't get a nurse by pushing the button. They didn't respond. And he was here when I had my prostate surgery. Probably of all three, for various reasons, we have been the closest. Tobin is like all of us. We all need love. And Tobin has found in Suzanne a person that brought love back into his life. My grandchildren have been always very important to me, and they always will be. They've enriched my life, and I'm going to miss them when I'm gone from them. I'm proud of my sons and what they've accomplished for themselves and what they've brought into my life that's positive. There was a strong affection between the boys and their mother, which was very important to me. Because after all, she was the one, we selected each other. The children came along as a result of that affection. As long as I live, I will always be their father. And as long as they live and I live, they'll be my beloved children. Good or bad, they'll always be mine. With love. I am always happy to be with my sons. And the time I spend with them is always too short. And suddenly, when I'm gone from them, it's awful quiet again. And the glow is missing. I guess that's the blessing and the tender trap of a family.
It's I think kind of amazing to me that one can be so inspired by another person. And I think it takes a very intense love to do that. Toni was a real sweetheart. I wouldn't be surprised if she had a feeling that she wasn't long for this world, because when she was 4, began to have colds, which required medications, chlorinated medications, which I'm convinced is the basic cause for the incurable liver ailment which she got when she was 10. Easter Sunday in 1972, there was a while when I thought Toni was going to die that day. She was breathing like she was panting like a dog. And I remember seeking the doctor out. Now, her regular doctor was in Texas, so there was a sub. And he was just going to give up, I think. But finally I said, for God's sakes, do something. And we all left the room. We were all there. And we came back in, and she almost suddenly stopped panting, and she woke up. When Toni came home in May of 1972, she would get into a coma. They couldn't wake her. And so I had her in the blue room, which has twin beds. And I slept in one bed and she in the other. And in those days I could still hear. And I could tell by her breathing. It woke me up if she wasn't breathing normally. And if I couldn't wake her, I had to quickly get dressed and carry her into the car and take her to the hospital. Now you can't do that and not have a kind of special memory of the person and the events in that place. She passed away in June of 1972. I can remember being greeted with love and affection by all the kids, and I can remember rolling around on the floor with them and hugging them. And I don't know how many times I put Joan to bed, kissed her goodnight, hugged her in her sleeping bedroom. And I kept asking Joan if she was happy here. Oh yes, I remember just a month before she died. I said, do you still want to live in this house? She said, oh yeah, no other house. This is great. This is where all the memories are. I've done all I could consistently for my family. And most of them in turn have done many things for me. Isn't that what family is about? Joan was very gentle, very affectionate, cuddly. She was very creative and very supportive, and we loved each other very much. Never ever reached the point where I didn't open the door of the car for her or the house. Oftentimes to open the car and have her get in, I'd give her a quick kiss. She once called me her hero, and she really was my inspiration. She was not at all a demanding person, but my love for her was so strong, I constantly sought ways to please her, to make her happy, to make her more comfortable. She was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. The night she died, I put her in the wheelchair, and backed the wheelchair up to go into the bedroom. And in order to get into the bedroom, I said, you got to raise your feet now, and she did. And I got a little foot or so more, and I said, you got to do it again, and she couldn't. And I put my arms around her and talked with her, but she didn't respond. I called the doctor immediately, and he came right over, and she was gone. So she died in my arms.
Oh, the world can change. It can change like that, with that one little word, Mary. See a castle rise from a two-room flat, with that one little word, married, and the old despair that was sometimes there suddenly ceases to be. For you'll wake one day, look around and say, somebody once married me.
Joan brought music into my life, and it left when she did. We didn't have her viewed in the coffin, but I did before they could put it down. And she looked to be 50 years old. Beautiful lady. And about 5 years after she died, I finally got rid of her clothes, which was a searing experience. I thought about some of the times she wore every one of those dresses and slacks. And I had my arms around her. I really miss her. And she'll always be in my memory. Nobody else like that. When you have someone of inspiration, that just doesn't go away. And she's very much a part of me and my memories. And those things that inspired me will be there forever. And it was easier to say forever 20 years ago, but because forever is getting closer all the time. And if some of my feelings and my thoughts, and my being inspired, exists in any of my kids, that's a way of it being forever.
I cried a tear, you wiped it dry. I was confused, you cleared my mind. I sold my soul, you bought it back for me and held me up and gave me dignity. Somehow you needed me. You gave me strength to stand alone again, to face the world out on my own again. You put me high up on a pedestal, so high that I could almost see eternity. You needed me.